Hey, everybody. Today we want to talk about audio. So welcome back to ChurchNeXt. I've got Jeff Cranfo with me again with SES. And we want to talk about audio because a lot of churches, when we got into the COVID crisis, we were recording and spending a lot of time on post-production. And we maybe even had friends who were producers who didn't have stuff going on, and we were doing these great multi-track mix downs of our stuff. And now we're going to go back live, and we have an audio issue that we probably haven't thought of before. So today we want to start and look at a few different things here. One is going to be, what are just the basic setup options for if you want to, how are you going to connect your boards and everything for broadcast, mixing for the room. And then also the last one here is going to be mixing for broadcast, because these are done a bit differently. So as far as the basic setup options, and Jeff, feel free to interject on any of this, and then we'll get into a conversation a bit later. But the basic first one is that your house mix, you just take an output off of your mixer that you have, and you go to broadcast. One of the issues here that I see is that a lot of times, in a lot of smaller churches especially, the amplifiers in the room, the speakers are very loud, and we're really not using a lot of sound in the soundboard, and we don't want it too loud in the room. And if we look on a meter, which we'll show later, we're not really pushing a lot of sound through the board. And then when we broadcast, people say they can't hear it, but I can't turn it up louder because it's going to be too loud in the room. So one way to fix that simply is if you have a matrix, and I'll talk about that in a second. If you're going to some other video switcher where you can take that low audio and turn it up louder, or maybe in your computer or whatever you're using, your encoder, maybe there's adjustments, or maybe it simply just goes to another soundboard just so you can boost the levels. So this would be more applicable if you're in a smaller congregation when you only have a few mics. If you're doing a full band mix, there's some other complications we'll talk about later with that. The basic premise of a matrix, and since the movie Matrix came out, this sounds more fancy than it is, but a matrix allows you to take your main mix, and most digital boards have this these days, but then also boost that signal, add some other things like some aux buses or some other channels, and make kind of another submix on top of it that you can put out another output. So we do this all the time where our audio levels are really low in the room, then we can boost them up on this other output all within the same board. So if you haven't used a matrix before, take a look at that on your console and see if that's something that you can do. The second option is your soundboard probably, especially if it's digital, even analog, has an aux bus. And this is a way of doing another mix on the same console. So you have your main faders, and then you probably have some knobs where you can adjust an audio output level to another output. So you could mix things a bit higher and maybe put some headphones on or some type of a monitor to mix this and adjust the levels differently for broadcast than you can in the room. With digital boards, it's great because a lot of them have iPad apps. So maybe I am in another room and I can hear what's going out the aux bus, and I have an iPad app and I can be mixing completely differently. So that's another option. One of the complications could be if you're trying to do stereo. Aux could be more difficult in stereo depending on your board. Also, if you're trying to do a lot of effects, it could be more difficult if you're just trying to use an aux bus. And then there we have the independent mix. The other option is do a separate audio split to a broadcast board. So in the analog days, you had a box where all of your audio, all of your mic cables came into, and on the out, it went to two separate boards. In digital, we can usually take some type of a digital split, and then we can have one board that's mixing for the room and one board that's mixing from broadcast. So there's some, depending on your board setup, that's going to be very different. You may be able to use even Dante. If you're familiar with Dante, that's another network protocol that a lot of places are using for getting the audio not only over to a broadcast board, but then also for recording, multi-track recording. If you're familiar with Dante, any source can go to any destination on a computer network. So it can be very flexible if you have the right networking. And if you're interested in that, talk to your integrator or talk to one of us, and we can help you through that type of a process. So mixing for the room, and this is, Jeff, where we can start talking about the differences between the room and broadcast, is the room is very forgiving. I think. You may not need to mic the drums in the room. A lot of times we're doing a mix to the drums. I was at a church this last week. We have all of our guitarists have their amplifiers just sitting here, and the drums are just sitting here, and all we're really mixing is the vocals and the keyboards. And you can probably get something that sounds pretty decent in the room, but it's not going to sound very good at all for broadcast. Also, all those sounds mesh together in the room. There's natural ambience in the room. I think it even helps with pitch. You don't catch all the pitch differences when you're in the room compared to broadcast. But in the room, and this is what we were talking about earlier, is you got to watch your gain structure. If I'm looking at this meter over here on the side, and I've got my greens, for broadcast level, we want to be up here in the yellows all the time. And that's kind of a standard. But sometimes in the room, I see we're way down here because it's loud enough in the room if it's right here. So when we bring audio into the console, the first pipe is the gain. And there's probably a button called PFL or something. And you can hit PFL, that's your pre-fader level, and see, is the signal even coming into my board hitting into the yellows? That means I have a good signal coming in. Then on my fader, as I'm adjusting my fader, am I getting into the yellows? A lot of times if a board gain structure is set up right, a lot of the faders are pretty close to the same spot. I mean, obviously some instruments you want louder or softer in your mix. And then when you get to your final master output, are you in the yellow again? So a lot of places don't have a good gain structure at all. And as you, in often the first one, that first gain is the one that's the most difficult. Your board has to have enough signal to even process. So that's the first part in setting up a gain structure. Then the next piece here we're going to talk about is broadcast. So Jeff, let's just kind of have a conversation here about broadcast and what are the ideal situations rather than me sitting in the room trying to listen in the room to mix for the people in the room and headphones to mix for a broadcast. What's our ideal situation here, or a better situation?
Yeah. And with everything you covered as far as the structure of how to come about getting that mix, all good options. I'll touch on those as we go through it. I think the biggest thing always to remember is, no one can hear anything we're doing until you put it through the console. Just like you said, back to the room being forgiving, we grow accustomed, especially in churches, we grow accustomed to how our room sounds, whether that's acoustically perfect or not. That's what we grow accustomed to. And we mix our audio that way. You have to put yourself in the position, just like with the video ideas of a camera shot, you have to realize that the viewing audience has no idea. They don't know what the room sounds like. They don't know what should or shouldn't be coming through the console. So, being able to replicate that experience for the person operating audio, I think is the most important thing. In a perfect world scenario, let's say it's online streaming, you would actually have someone monitoring the stream. Much like the pictures we have here of what we're watching here, as for what I'm looking at, the picture's this big. Well, so is the sound that we're hearing, unlike the big room that you're used to going to every Sunday. And that becomes important about how you're listening to it and how you're EQing things. And one of the things you can't do, you can't put tons of bass. And so, let's say in your room, it's nice and thick and full, and you do have the drums mic'd, and the kick drum has a good punch to it, and the bass guitar has a good rumble to it. Well, that's not really going to happen that well over your phone listening to earbuds.
Yeah.
But it is important that those instruments still exist in the mix. And what we so often do in the live room, we cut back on these things. And especially in the terms of worship music, we put the vocals, which obviously that's the priority, or the vocal. We put the vocals louder, but in this the problem we run into without being able to monitor this mix in the proper manner, the vocals are so much louder that now they have no music to support them. So you have to kind of retrain yourself to grow accustomed to A bass guitar may just sound a little thin. The kick drum there just might be a little attack there.
Sure.
Not the big, punch in your chest that we all want to hear. But
in the room, it helps accomplish a lot of that. It's not all done digitally.
Exactly.
It takes a lot to digitally process and make it feel that way in even your best conditions.
Oh yeah, yeah. And so, back to how you reference doing the mix. Let's say, for example, the first example you had is that your only choice is to come off of the left and right of your console or the mono of your console.
Mm-hmm.
Well, the first thing you have to do is probably turn down your sound system, whether that's done at the main output of the console or whether that's done at the amplifiers or the processor. Somewhere that gain structure is going to be off, because let's say in a smaller room like that, the drums are never in the sound system,
right?
Or the bass guitar or anything else, or that might have an amplifier to produce ambient volume.
Mm-hmm.
All of those instruments now have to be in the mix.
Yes.
And so but again, it's one of these things where you can't overdo it. I often go in today, I see people that are currently trying to create broadcast mix, whether they're doing them from a matrix, an auxiliary, or their main console. And I'll look at their drum channels and they'll have the low end turned up on all of them. And I'm like, well, the one thing you have to remember, operating in the audio field that we're operating in right now with online streaming, you can't put something in there that doesn't exist in the first place.
Sure.
And so you can keep turning that knob up, but basically what you're doing is you're just making noise. You're just creating more noise that clutter up the gain structure, as you were talking about, because we tend to be beings when it comes to audio of we never turn anything down. We only turn everything up.
Yeah. Yeah. Buddy of mine always said turning up the bass may mean turning everything else down.
Exactly.
So you get that gain creep. Yeah.
Exactly. And so this is where that's so more important than ever, is to figure out where's that flat line, where's that nice level mix from channel 1 to channel 48, regardless of what's in there.
Right.
And that even goes for spoken word. We tend to, this day and age, whoever's speaking tends to be wearing a headset mic or a lav. And well, those microphones don't have the characteristics and the quality of a really nice vocal microphone.
Right.
But again, you can't over enhance things thinking you're going. So it's about training yourself to listen to what I tell everyone is more of a lo-fi audio.
Right.
It's kind of what we're shooting for. We're setting the bar high on what we want to do with the quality of our overall presentation. But from an audio standpoint, we're trying to contain it in this small box and get all the audio in it.
When we switched the first week, because our mix off the board is decent. It's not great, but it's decent. So the first week we said, okay, we're just going to mix in the room. There wasn't an audience there. And we said, well, how can I mix when I'm hearing the speakers? So we turned all the speakers off.
Right.
And then what we noticed is the band was pretty good. The guy was watching the meters. But we know that every week when we broadcast, the vocal, when the pastor is talking, we tend to it's way lower, just because people don't need him shouting at you all the time. So that's when we said, I kept telling him, don't go by what you hear. You need to watch the meters. It's going to feel loud to you, but I need the meters to be right.
Exactly. And that's the difference when we're moving into more of a broadcast experience versus live audio. Live audio, we teach everyone, don't mix with your eyes. Mix with your ears. Digital consoles now will draw these nice little squiggly lines of our EQ as we do things, and I'll see people point at that screen and go, "Oh, look, I've done this, 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 and this." And I was like, "Well, I'm not really worried about that. What's it sound like?"
Right.
Well, that's still exactly the way to approach each individual channel, in my opinion. Make things sound good. But now we've got to take all of these things and put them out a bus.
Right.
And that's either a left, right, a mono, a matrix, an aux, whatever your routing is to get it to your stream. And so you took all of these things and you put them in this one small bus, and you want to hear it all without the benefit of actually being in the room where this energy is being created.
Right.
So, if you've ever, well, I know you in TV studios, radio stations, but you'll see these mixed bus limiters, and they're all, the meters are like this always. They're always sitting somewhere at a 6 dB down point, never getting any higher. And what they're because they're wanting to take any transient that's huge to small, and they're just wanting to squash it all down into this one little stream. That doesn't mean that sounds bad. I guess for lack of better explanation is I'm trying to make my audio small.
Right. So compression.
But get everything in there. Yeah,
we're doing some compression and expansion and really trying to get all that sound, this huge range into this part to ship out. Yeah.
And what happens when, I don't know exactly what the bandwidth of YouTube, Facebook's, but I don't know what their bandwidths are.
Mm-hmm.
But there's definitely differences you can hear when you start listening to the actual stream, and you're like, wow, that person singing just wasn't that loud.
Yeah.
When I was mixing it. So that's what other things get complicated there, because they have types of compression on their end as well.
Right.
That and the thing that I tell everybody, when it's not, I'm not saying this to go in and put a compressor on every channel, or if you have a console that has the ability to do that, it's not really the purpose. It's the output bus. It's whatever you're sending out. Yes, that should have some type of limiter, compressor on it to keep that range of how you describe the gain structure in that smaller zone of the yellow.
So that could happen in the console itself. It could be an outward compressor you're running through. Or like in ours, I know some of our switchers, they have auto gain compensation or compressors built into them,
Right. Hey, somewhere you want to do that as the end result. You want that solid compression that's keeping everything trail, in a good bus. But at that point, you want to make sure that's what you're monitoring.
Right.
And that's really and that's where the difficulty comes into a lot of church sound systems, because you don't have the infrastructure to monitor that. I tell everyone, one of the easiest things you can do is, let's say you got a couple of people on your staff as far as the media team goes.
Mm-hmm.
You might just want to have someone sit in another room monitoring your stream, on a phone or wearing earbuds, just with the ability to communicate back to you what they're hearing.
Yeah, it tells me a lot when I think it's good in the control room and someone texts me and says, hey, it's really low on the stream.
Exactly.
I'm not listening to the stream. I'm comfortable in the room. So even if it's a 30-second delay that they're hearing it, at least I'm getting some feedback from someone saying,
right,
our snare drum sounds great in the room and sounds like you're hitting a plastic tub in the stream.
Exactly. Because you'll find out you might do some things that are really out of the norm, and as far as what you're used to hearing, or the EQ, because a lot of times when you're doing just like that, like take a snare drum for example, a lot of that ambient sound gets out in the room. So usually whatever you're coloring on the console, you're just putting small little fields, the little things you want to hear in addition to that.
Sure.
But now all of a sudden what you're hearing online is just that snare drum, and you may have some kind of crazy EQ on it to make it work in your room.
Right.
So I think what I find myself doing is EQing less. I do a lot less EQing. I do a lot less channel by channel compression. Usually in a live mixing scenario, all of that stuff is based out of creating sound reinforcement.
And we don't have the feedback issue when we're doing broadcasts.
Exactly. So
squashing frequencies to avoid feedback, we can let those frequencies go out on the broadcast.
Yeah. So there's a lot of things you can do. You're basically creating your room. You're changing the way it presents to someone. It may not even sound right to you. Because you might be sitting there doing this audio going, well, I would never mix it this way if there were people in here.
Right.
But you see people in there make the room sound different.
Yes.
So there's all these different things that you have to go on the approach of, no one has a clue what we're doing. No one has a clue of what things should sound like, or today's band makeup is 2 electric guitars, keyboards, 5 singers, drums, bass. Well, all of that has to get through.
Right.
Because you can't just rely on the ambient volume of it. And so to me, the biggest thing anyone should be doing is setting up their monitoring so that it's as close to the actual process of the output bus.
Yeah. So here I say, listen the same way your audience will.
Yeah.
Leslie Sullivan put on here. She says, Phil and Jeff, what if you can't isolate? Would noise canceling headphones work? Right now, we just don't have a separate space. And Adam mentioned maybe in-ears. So if you can't have a separate space, do you have some suggestions there?
Well, I think it's necessary to do either in-ears. But here's the thing you want to do. Don't go out and buy the most expensive in-ears and headphones. Most of the people I'm working with and speaking with that are doing this across the country, they're finding that the more consumer grade product is what the listening audience has.
Right. So not big speakers that you went on in Sweetwater and bought for your studio room, but little desktop audio from Best Buy.
Yeah. But yes, headphones or earbuds is definitely the way I would suggest if you don't have the option of isolating yourself. Now that comes into another element of this is what we were talking about is once you're creating this mix, the other thing that you need to do when someone's watching this, that you got to remember they're not in the room. So they're not, you want them to experience it, especially if it's a person that's a regular member. Let's use just a Sunday church service and your online viewing audience is 75% of the membership of your church. They're accustomed to going in this building, how this building sounds, even whether that's good or bad, the little reflections, the little echoes, the little things that happen. Everyone's used to that. So
and you're not even aware of it.
Yes. Yeah. So now what comes to the next challenge is I tell everyone is actually miking your room. And so you don't want to turn your sound system off completely. As crazy as this sounds, basically what you're doing is you're miking your PA.
Right.
And a great way to do this is if you just have 2 microphones, put one close to the stage as if there were just somewhere in the seats, 3 or 4 rows back, and then put one close to the back of the room. So now you've got 2 microphones that represent the space that someone's used to sitting in that room. And these don't have to be in the mix super loud. If your routing allows for you with a matrix or an auxiliary bus to be able to keep that isolated from turning them actually on in the sound system, that's the best method. It's called a mix minus type scenario. But you want to create that. You want to create that natural reverb. Every room in the world, even a room like I'm sitting in that has acoustic panels on it, still has some type of reverb. Every room has a sound, and you want to duplicate that. You can't duplicate that with the effects that are on your console or outboard of your console.
They're going to sound
you can buy the most expensive plug-in in the world of a duplicate of the greatest reverb chamber wherever, and it sounds beautiful and gives great texture to vocals and things like that. But that's not the world that you're living in. Right. You actually want to make it sound like where you are. So that's why, especially mixing on headphones or earbuds in this scenario is really important. So let's say you are just one person, just one console, one situation here. You got a little extra work to do. You've got to get everything that needs to be in your audio stream, regardless of what instrumentation, vocals, whatever that is. All of the elements need to get into your audio stream. You need to hear them through your sound system.
Right.
But they can be at a very low level, not the level it takes when the room is full of people.
Yeah.
And then you want to mic that as far as capturing that audio. But now you need to put a pair of headphones on or earbuds on and go, okay, what's it sound like in here?
Right.
So yes, the isolation is really important. So when you're listening on your isolated headphones, you want to hear the room through there, not through the bleed.
Right.
So you don't want open ear microphones, things like headphones. I'm sorry. Things like that. You definitely want the isolation.
Or I've done, if you have cheap earbuds and then you have a pair of like lawn mowing headphones for isolation,
exactly,
to try and get them as much of the room out as possible.
Yeah. Anything you can help to get some of that noise out, because you're gonna listen to that, and all of a sudden you're gonna realize that your mix really needs some adjustments. Using a matrix and an aux is a great way to do it. The good thing about both of those is with an auxiliary, you can set it up to be post fader. So that if you have the opportunity in the rehearsal time to sit down and mix. Sorry, I'm mixing faders. If you wonder what, mix your sound in your sound system like you would want it to sound.
Yeah,
and then put your headphones on, take the auxiliary, isolate the mix. If you get the mix where you want there, you can actually leave the headphones off and pretty much run the faders up and down if the aux is post fader, and it will track close. Same thing with the matrix. So that's where that's really handy, is that so you're not so uncomfortable running audio. You can still just be sitting there listening to the sound system, mixing everything, but you're still going to need to go into that isolation port, especially if you've got things like live drums in the room, because you're always going to hear that ambient sound, unless your drummer is in a concrete block room where nothing can get out. And then again, it's figuring out what it takes to get all of that audio into a manageable bus. And if you do have a digital console with certain plugins and things, they make things now that actually have YouTube and Spotify presets.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, but I'm doing the research. If without getting too detailed here, most digital consoles work at a minus 18 dB headroom metering scenario. It seems like most online streaming wants to be at a negative 14 headroom. So the good part about that is that as your explanation of the green, the yellow, and the red goes, working in the yellow, that's basically in that zone where they want to see. And anything that goes above that's going to create distortion. Anything that goes below that really drops off fast when you're online streaming. Again, that's where you would be used to hearing that in the room, and you're just totally missing it now in the mix. So it's a little bit of a juggling act to get everything in that small window. But
I thought it was interesting when you're talking about, we don't know what frequencies even in the bandwidth we have. I found, this was 20, 30 years ago, and I learned that a telephone, maybe I'm wrong on this, maybe the old telephone, you couldn't actually hear middle C on a telephone.
Correct.
You can hear the overtones, but you don't actually hear that because it can't reproduce some of those frequencies. And I've heard more and more people saying, wow, our audio sounds horrible on Facebook, and in other services is different because of what they're doing and their processing and what information they're throwing away to handle all this bandwidth in the world.
Well, and the telephone, to give you a little history, those that may not know, that's where the first compressor came from. That's the invention of the compressor, was exactly that, because when the telephone was invented, you had people that had louder voices or softer voices. You had deep voices, high voices, and they needed to get all of that into this tiny little speaker going down this little wire. And that's exactly where a compressor expander circuitry first was developed, was in the telephone, so that everything was pretty much closely matched regardless of who's talking. And that's exactly what we're doing again.
And how are we making it the best we can when it sounds like it's coming through a telephone? Because the reality is most of our audience is watching it on
that's what I'm saying. That we're back to that. It's still a telephone. And Wi-Fi can show great quality audio and video, just like what we've got going right now. But there's definitely limitations once you start trying to put so much energy. We're two people sitting here talking right now. That's really easy from an audio standpoint. You think about the dynamic range of everything from a bass guitar to a person praying, and then that person's male, female. the ranges are just massive, and you're asking for a lot of energy to get put into a small box.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's quite the balancing act, but all doable. You just have to kind of break out of your habits. Or I hear this a lot. I hear people, they walk up to a console and they immediately start making adjustments, and I'm thinking, why are you making those adjustments? There's nothing coming through there, through that channel. And they're like, well, this is how I always set up the pastor's mic. Well, that's okay if that works in the room, but that might not work on the other end of, someone's iPad, wherever they're,
And
watching.
how many churches are set it, forget it type of situations where we just have a bunch of mics going through a Radio Shack amplifier mixer that we bought 50 years ago, and it just works. And now we want to broadcast. So I'm going to make a little bit of a push for digital consoles, because whether it's a really inexpensive digital console through the biggest digital consoles, and we're talking from, a few $100s to hundreds of thousands of dollars, a lot of them have these features that are going to be a huge step over what you have with analog. And it's worth looking in. I can almost say with certainty they're going to have aux buses. They're going to have some type of a matrix. They're probably going to have some type of an iPad app, or even if you can't be perfectly isolated, you could just walk in the other room and be able to mix a little bit remotely.
Yeah. Well, that's true. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, yeah, digital consoles definitely have the feature set from, the most affordable to the most expensive. They all have certain features that are definitely a benefit for doing exactly what we're doing with online streaming audio and things like that right now.
If you're looking at a system, think about where are we at today and how do we want to expand? Right now, we're talking about a lot of audio manufacturers don't make a board. They make a series of boards and input output boxes and it's networks and cards. And right now we're working with churches on what do you need today, but what might you need in the future to make sure we get you into a brand and an ecosystem that's going to allow you to grow. Your digital console did what it did and it didn't expand. Your analog. Digital is a lot different now. Now we're looking at what are the future possibilities.
Absolutely. The good thing about it is, and with you mentioned Dante, and there's other network protocols too. But with all of those, if depending on what you prefer to have, the expansion is great. One of the things that we're experiencing with our integration department, that they will go in and set up, different rooms with the same brand of digital console so that they're in the same network. So let's say, for instance, something that's all in Dante, they have the ability to network even these other rooms in, so that, from that sense, if you may have the ability to do what we're talking about and not know it in your building. Yeah. Because that's the beauty of this. You can network so many things in that you may have the ability to remotely mix or monitor or things like that. But, but from an advantage standpoint, is if you're moving into that, just realize that you could have your main worship center and your youth room, and they want to hear something from one room to the other. Well, now with the networking systems, that's very easily done and done consistently. And I think that's the other part. You're talking about the set and forget. Well, consistency is a big part of this, and that works in the live situation. Well, a lot more times than often. That. Again, we're used to hearing the room, we're used to hearing the things, but now that we're in this more broadcast scenario, and understand everything I'm talking about as far as the broadcast mix goes, doesn't hurt your live mix at all. Right. It's actually kind of a good teaching method to sort of train yourself to listen for the things that you didn't think you need to listen for.
Right.
But like most people, Sunday to Sunday, there's different musicians, there's different singers, there's different instruments. Any of those changes just changed your set and forget idea. And you have to put a lot more care and concern into all that. And I was talking about the compression part, and I wanted to qualify something about that. the reason I said I don't necessarily go in and put a compressor on every channel or this, a lot of people don't realize exactly what triggers a compressor.
Okay.
And you have to be very careful about overextending your gain structure and your EQ in these things. I've walked into plenty of consoles before and seen someone that had 16K on a vocal mic boosted 16 dB because they want to hear that wispy, airy, nice little sibilance thing in there. And then the compressor on that channel is doing a gain reduction of, negative 32 dB. And they can't figure out why they can't make this vocal sound right.
Or cranking it up and then squashing it.
Exactly. But you're cranking up frequencies that you couldn't hear in the first place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
That's where the digital console has that ability. The digital console, unlike an analog console, had limitations on what it could produce from the lowest frequencies to the highest frequencies. A digital console doesn't. So yeah, you go in and the snare drum you think sounds better with 60 hertz turned up 12 dB. Well, all that's really doing is triggering a compressor.
Mm-hmm.
It's not necessarily sounding better. So I always tell everyone when they're approaching this type of mix, start with all the if you speaking digital consoles mainly,
mm-hmm.
start with your channel compressors off. Get your mix the way you want it. Get that output bus compressing in that nice window of gain structure you talked about. Everything's in the mix. Everything's clear. You'll probably find out when spoken word starts that you have to bring those levels up to match the energy of where the music was. But everything's in that range working perfectly.
Mm-hmm.
And then if you've got something that you just can't control, something that you just can't tolerate from a gain structure, go back and put a compressor on that individual
mm-hmm.
channel to help keep it, regulated a little better.
Yeah.
And that's what we're doing with compressors and limiters in these cases. We're using them to regulate the high transients in the audio, unlike some of the tips and tricks you'll see on YouTube of guys mixing recording sessions and going, well, this is how I got this sound, and it's because this compressor did this huge pumping volume in and out type thing. Those are now, you don't want to use them as effects is what I'm getting at.
Sure.
So it's better to start with none and then add as needed. And same thing goes with the EQ. Start flat and then add as needed. You'll find that you're doing a lot less manipulating the audio, and the least amount you can do, you affect your overall gain structure the least, your overall compression, everything. You just get a lot better sounding product that way.
That's great. I feel like most of what we're doing with EQ in a live room, at least in the experience when I have with most churches, is we're just trying to eliminate feedback and issues with the room,
exactly.
Not actually shape sound for what's pleasurable, just so we can get through without something that's not horrible.
Yeah. Because
broadcast, we have much more freedom. We're not worried about that anymore.
Oh, yeah, because most vocal mics, most instruments sound fine,
right?
Just the way they are.
So you talked about ambient mics in the room. Do you have any models or model numbers, or what type of mic? If people are saying, yes, we need room mics, which mic should we get? Do you have any?
I think the best thing you can do as far as room mics goes, use a condenser, a large diaphragm condenser mic if you have them.
Mm-hmm.
Reason being is you're going to get a lot more signal to noise ratio, better that way. Let's say your room has noisy air conditioners or something like that. You're going to get a little better response in that. But the other thing, you want to try to capture as much of the overall frequency range as you can in the room. Again, there's low end and high end things that we don't even hear when we're sitting in the room. We don't even know they're there. But if you could isolate, like let's say you had multi-track recording and you went back and just recorded those two room mics, it'll really, you'll be always surprised at like how big the sound is.
Right.
In that you don't even notice.
Right.
And but your brain picks that up. Your ears hear it, your brain puts it together. That's what tells you you're in this building. That's what tells you you're in this room. So trying to replicate that is really important. But honestly, it's really whatever you have.
Right. Right.
I mean, if you just had a couple of SM57s, they work.
I know one that we've used a lot. It's an expensive mic, but it's that Audix SCX25, which looks kind of like a lollipop. But it's got a large diaphragm. It can pick up a lot of different frequencies. It's an expensive mic, but if it's something your broadcast really relies on, and now's the time when your church is kind of making some of those decisions. Right now, they're really motivated. So if you're looking at digital, if you're looking at mics, now's the time to kind of put some of those things together, because everybody's been benefiting from this stream. So we can talk about, if we want that to be better moving down the road, here's some steps we need to take. I like the talk about Dante, because we work with a congregation that has multiple facilities on their campus. Like now we have a really good network with fiber optic backbone and stuff. We could really be doing the broadcast mix from my office 2 buildings away, couldn't we? Well, absolutely. And then that when you plug in the sound console in the youth room, you can just pick from all the audio inputs and outputs on the whole network. So you have to have good networking guys to do this, or you'll pull your hair out, but the capabilities are there.
Well, even a couple of things you can do too. Those are the grand extreme. That's that, and that's where I always encourage most people when they're upgrading their gear. Well, if you're going to be in multi rooms, pick stuff that you can keep consistent throughout the room. Not just for the opportunity to do what we're talking about here, but also just the learning curve.
Yeah, once the volunteer knows, they shouldn't have to learn another console and another console.
Exactly. But some of the tricks that we've done. We've since all of this came about, we've been at a lot of different churches doing a lot of different streaming options, and of course, some of them just don't have everything it takes. But most of them do this day and age have a digital console that gave us the ability to send some type of other output than their left-right signal to the broadcast. One of the things I just recently did with a church, what made me think about was using a matrix. I actually used a matrix to send stems of their main mix over to a small little analog console that they had, repurposed into a youth room.
Interesting.
And that became the broadcast desk, because again, you want the mix as perfect as possible, but the biggest thing you're trying to do is make sure you've got a handle on those things that get out of control.
Yeah.
So in this case, they had a channel that was the drum kit. They had a channel that was the guitars.
So we're saying stems, just for people who don't understand that.
Yeah.
We're taking these 24 channels and grouping them and condensing them down into something more manageable, like 8 channels of groups.
Yeah. And that's what we wound up with. We had 8 groups. We had an 8 output matrix. So we went in and via headphones, we mixed the drum kit to sound good. Now that just had, here it was. We had a good mix of the drum kit. Now that's coming out of one output of a matrix. So the person sitting at what we called the broadcast desk just had 8 channels.
Right.
And one of those was anyone, and the same thing, we had a channels dedicated to spoken word. In their case, that was a headset mic and 2 handheld mics for people that were doing welcome, scripture readings, and a pastor. Right. But it was all on one channel. So when that person, whoever was speaking, you had the ability to bring that level up and down. And we set a reference point on the meter and said, just try, don't think you have to hit a bullseye every time.
Right.
Just get in the range.
I think that's great, because now we're saying whether it's in the room or in broadcast, the relationship between a tom and a cymbal and a snare and a kick is pretty similar, those relationships.
Yeah.
But the volume in the room needs to be down here because we have acoustic energy.
Right.
But that chunk needs to be up here in broadcast.
Yeah.
So if you think through those pieces that are going to be relative to each other, that relativity is the same in the room, that becomes a chunk, a stem you can send down to broadcast.
Yeah, and it's another easy option for some people to do. And you still net way better results. Even the fact that you have like I was talking earlier about, we tend to make the vocals way too loud.
Yep.
Well, now you at least have the ability. Here's on these 4 faders, you have the band. And let's say on these 2 faders, you may have your vocalists split up, depending on what parts people sing. Well, at least that now we have the ability to bring that music up, when necessary. But if the music gets a little, we can at least balance it a little better.
You were talking about singers and being too loud. And one thing that I've noticed, and just another tip here, is the audio guy in the room does rely a lot on visual. He sees when someone steps up to the mic to know which mic to open. But one thing is, like, I was watching a broadcast a few weeks ago, and it was a female singer in this point singing away. The camera is just on her, and she is not in the mix. Right. In the room, she could be singing or not singing. I'm watching everything that's going on, but video focused me on that, and she wasn't singing clearly. The guitarist was playing a solo, and it clearly was not in my mix. So I want to give that audio person also a multi-view or some type of a video reference of what they're seeing, which is going to help them align a bit. Yeah. It was really weird to highlight someone who is not clearly an audio mix.
Well, and in those experiences too, depending on how the mix was being done in the scenario, it's very possible that vocalist and that guitar player were heard in the room.
Yeah, sure.
Is very possible. So I always tell everyone, it's not necessarily that, I don't know that they missed something. It's as much as they just weren't listening to the right reference.
Right.
And that's back to that isolation thing where that becomes important. We touched on it a little bit back to when the question was about earbuds and headphones and things like that. If you are listening to the actual stream, there is going to be quite a bit of latency. That can be very aggravating for someone. So even if you have to come up with some makeshift ways of creating some isolation, we've done anything from moving people into hallways, into closets, putting up acoustic baffles around, anything you can figure out to try to cut. So if you're the solo person kind of having to do both jobs, that's really hard sometimes to be able to, because it's quite I don't know what the exact latency time is, but it's quite a bit.
I mean, if it's on YouTube or Facebook, it could be 20 or 30 seconds.
Yeah. And it's sometimes what I tell, if you're referencing what you're watching, if you're watching a band play, especially, but the audio is 30 seconds behind them.
Yeah.
It's hard to get your brain wrapped around what needs to change in the mix.
Right.
What needs to adjust. I've even told some people, if nothing else, have, like you said, a monitor set up. If you're the one person, I'm looking this way at what's happening on the stage, and I'm turning this way to see and listen what's happening over here, because I don't need that messing with my mind right now of what I'm trying to accomplish. Yeah.
Right. And it doesn't need to be a big space. In a broadcast audio, it's like the smallest part of the truck is where the audio guy squeezes in to a console to be able to hear what's going on. So it could be, Leslie just mentioned, we joked about building a little house in the booth for our tech guy. So it doesn't need to be a big space that they can be in, but it's just isolated. I just think because a lot of our audience knows the youth gathering, the broadcast audio guy was on the other side of the building in a locker room, and he had blankets hung all over the place. And there was a little slit in the door where we could see him, but I also know that communication with that person is good too, because that person doesn't have the advantage of seeing the room. They also don't control the preamps. They probably don't control whether things are muted or not. So communication of what's coming up in the script. There's a solo coming up. He can't see necessarily that someone's getting ready for a solo. So you may need to have better communication between those two people if you're really going to get into doing this the ideal way.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. If you're starting to split out your broadcast audio, you definitely want to make sure that they can see what's happening in the room at all time. And that there's definitely some level of communication. just in case something changes.
Yeah.
Because, we all like to stick to what we scripted out and here's the timeline, exactly the way we're going to go. But sometimes you got to make an adjustment.
Well, and what if someone was on this mic, the battery went dead, so you moved into another mic, but you didn't tell the broadcast guy, then pastor comes out to talk, you pull up his mic and he didn't realize that it had changed somewhere else.
Yeah. So, I mean, we are dealing with electronic gear. Things do happen. Yeah.
And I think taking a listen. So once you get done, the service is over. You don't just shut it down. Now through the week, listen to it on your computer, listen to it on your phone. What are some things you're recognizing that you can compensate for the next week?
So the hardest thing I personally have it, and I think everyone has this issue, listening to stuff like that over.
Yeah.
It's kind of like, we do it and we don't really think about it, but you're exactly right. It's not just listen to it one time. I tend to any of the Sunday or weekend events that I'm doing currently, I listen to them shortly after they aired.
Mm-hmm.
But then I go back about 2 days later and listen to that again. I know everyone's experienced this, whether you were doing a recording, a church service, at a concert, whatever you were doing, you left and there was a song playing when you left.
Mm-hmm.
How long did that song play in your head?
Too long, probably.
Exactly. For the rest of the day and the night, you're just humming that song. And I think you have to get out of that zone. You have to get out of that and into just a fresh day.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you walk away saying that went great and you're on that high, or that went horrible and you're on that low. Yeah. Then you watch it again and say, it wasn't as good as I thought, or that was way better than I thought it was.
No, I'm doing that right now with before starting this today. I'm working on some audio for video and went back and listened to it and found out that we can hear a generator running in the room. And I've listened to it 3 times.
Right.
It took the 3rd time of figuring out there was this noise that now we've got to work around. And
have another person listen to it. I remember when some of the first albums I'd ever done, where you get it sounding great in the studio, and then the first time you put it in your car, you burn the CD and you listen to it with your friend in the car, and you're like, this is bad.
Yeah, this wasn't what I thought it was. Yeah. So definitely revisiting what you're doing. It's really important. And I think it's really important to know that we're not just talking music.
Mm-hmm.
From the majority, an average Sunday service or any online stream event could be live music, spoken word, and even video playback. And that's another thing that I see when I watch some of these streams. No one's realizing how loud their video playback is.
Yeah.
And we tend to go in and play, whether you have the ability to produce, award-winning videos that sound and look incredible, or if you're pulling stuff off the internet, pre-packaged things that you bought in a teaching package or something.
Sure.
Those tend to have really high quality, super processed, well done audio.
Right.
And we bring that into here, and all of a sudden this video is just its audio is towering above everything else that happened before it and after it.
Interesting. Mm-hmm.
And the way our minds work, we kind of shut down. So I've heard people before go, well, they played that video and then the pastor went up and started speaking and I couldn't hear him. And it's like, well, it's not that you couldn't hear it. You turned down your volume.
Yeah.
The video was so
that's
loud.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so back to that meter thing. This is one of the things where I teach people when it comes to production in general. We always say there's certain rules, and then we say, now we're going to break all the rules.
Right.
One of the things that we teach in production for years and years is don't mix by meters. Don't mix by the screen you see. Don't mix this way. Use your ears.
Uh-huh.
Well, we got to use the meter too.
Now we're paint by number again.
Yeah. We still want to. You still use your ears. Still be creative. Still understand what music should sound like. What a nice speaking voice should sound like. Pay attention to these things.
Mm-hmm.
But whatever's going out, make sure it's staying in that window. And yeah, video playback tends to always be a little overbearing.
Mm-hmm.
And you may even need to do things that you normally wouldn't do in your room. Videos tend to have a little, they put the big loudness scoop in their EQ. So they got a lot of top end, they got a lot of low end. The mids are kind of scooped out a little bit, gives it that big movie sound.
Sure.
We might want to dumb that down a little bit, because again, those over enhanced frequencies are triggering that compressor when it doesn't need to be triggering. So yeah, rehearsing through what I'm getting at is rehearsing through everything is important.
And Leslie pushes this. She says, our big concern is actually getting our organ into the mix and having it come across well. We're going to play with that all week. And that's I like that last point. And we'll talk about acoustic things like we have about 5 minutes left, but spend all week working
all
on
week. It'll take it. Yeah. Wow. What a great challenge. The organ. I've been doing this for 40 years, and that's still always been the challenge. Either you can't hear it or it's too loud.
Right.
So again,
coming from the room, Mike. I mean,
are
you making the ambient room mic, because it's a big instrument. We're used to hearing it big in the room, so your room mic's going to pick that up. Your choir may be tough if they're a weaker choir. You may need to actually amplify them a little bit more than
a traditional organ is built for the room. Right. And so, yes, very hard to replicate. But I have recently had a little experience with that. The room mics were important, but we did go up and listen and find the main two speakers. Didn't so much worry about the antiphonal speakers, things like that, but just the main speakers, and we close mic them.
Okay.
For a blend. And I would say it probably came out mix wise about a 50-50 of that and the room.
Okay.
Yeah. Not as wonderful and immaculate as in a nice big room,
right,
with a well done organ, but that was about as close as we could get in that situation.
And you can mic the heck out of this stuff, or you can go fewer mics. Don't think that you have to. I mean, you get the guy who mics the symphony with a mic in front of every instrument, and then the guy who just puts up a pair.
Right.
And they have different.
The conductor's supposed to be mixing it, so it's the conductor's job to mix it.
Right.
Yeah, I think definitely don't overthink that process.
Right.
Always just find what works, because it's back to the scenario of a choir. We've always found out that people go in and want to put up a choir mic for every third person there is. The more mics, the more phase issues, the more noise issues, the more everything issues. The fewer mics, the better.
Yeah.
In these scenarios, you can definitely do a lot with fewer mics. And that's even if you are trying to keep, but we just did a setup with a church trying to do more of an unplugged scenario instead of a full drum kit, cajon, acoustic guitars. In case no one's noticed by my very undistinguishable accent, I'm a little Southern.
Adam Countryman mentioned that last time, and I didn't.
I never know. Do I have an accent? I don't know.
Yes, you do.
Okay. But living in this area, I got a lot of bluegrass musicians, and that's exactly what we were dealing with here. Now, I know that might not be the case in everybody's church, but we realized that we were better off minimal miking this whole setup, and we did it more like the room mics. We took a couple of large diaphragm condensers and just put them at a good spacing where when you put your headphones on, you went, yeah, that sounds great.
Yeah. And
the control we had on the end of that, I mean, the comments came back after those streams of how enjoyable everything was, and I realized, I'm like, well, we're not working your brain too hard.
Right.
We made it simple, and by making it simple, we were able to put together something that had a level of excellence from the music through the spoken word portion. So definitely don't overthink it. That's for sure. Yeah.
Just to summarize here, I want to just really thank you for your time for this one and the lighting one. I really appreciate that. You guys have so much experience around the country, working in live events and also in installs and working with a lot of different churches. So I appreciate that. One thing when you're picking your personnel is that broadcast isn't a throwaway as far as the abilities of that person. It's very difficult. I see a lot of places put their best sound guy in the house and have like their third stringer doing broadcast. Well, broadcast, everything is exposed. It's a real skill. And like Leslie said, it's going to take a lot of practice. And I think about some of these bands where we have a lead singer and then the 5 backing vocalists, all with their own mic. It's just gonna be really difficult to mix that for broadcast and make it sound good. Maybe there's a different miking that we're doing for the broadcast side of that because we don't have the forgiveness of the room. So it's going to take a lot of experimentation, do some recordings, play them back. It's not a quick fix, really. And it's going to take some experience.
No, and you know, it's not a requirement, but yes, typically someone with a musical background may have a little leg up, you know. And when I say musical background, that doesn't mean you have to be able to play an instrument or sing. It's understand the flow of how an engaging worship set should be, because that's a whole other discussion that we can get into. But I think it's important to understand that you do understand how this all happens and should flow, because you know, a well put together service, a great worship band needs your help in supporting the level that they're going for. You know, sometimes it is strong and powerful and right there in your face, and other times we need to pull that back and create a little more space and a little more emotion. That's where having that person that understands on that broadcast end is so paramount, because those things don't happen as natural in broadcast as they would in the room. Yeah. And so, yes, you are correct that, it's very important to have someone who understands that. Yeah.
Well, good luck, everybody. Thank you again for your time, Jeff. If you guys have any questions, we put our email addresses out a few times. Feel free to get a hold of either of us, and good luck, everybody. Thank you very much.
Thanks.